Do you have champagne taste and a beer budget when it comes to fabric? Do you want to use the good stuff, but just can't afford the 8 yards to make that project? Have I got a doozy for you, my friend? Because playing all of those video games as a kid has given you the magical skill to save you hundreds, maybe even thousands of smackaroos on fabric. How, you ask? One word. Tetris. Okay, hear me out. I know it sounds crazy, but this method of pattern cutting and fabric arrangement on average saves me about 1/2 to 2 full yards of fabric on every single project I make. And I make a new project every 2 weeks. It adds up, my friends. It adds up fast. If you're not familiar with Tetris, it's a video game from the 80s where block puzzle pieces fall and you have to arrange them to create lines. Once you make a full line, it disappears, you get points, and prevent yourself from spilling over and losing the game. What adds to this process is that each shape has different arrangements. The long line can go horizontal or vertical. The zigzags can change orientation. The L and T shapes have tons of different layouts. There is no one specific way to place things, and so there are many ways to solve the same problem. Just like arranging your pattern pieces on your fabric to cut them out. Even though a pattern gives you a suggested layout, doesn't mean you have to follow it. The first thing you want to do is look at your suggested layout. Look for the negative spaces, the places where there are no pattern pieces on your chunks of fabric. This is room for opportunity. Then you'll lay out your fabric and start experimenting. Start with the fold and straight grain pieces and lay them out first. I just spilled water all over myself. Y'all can deal with it, right? If you're doing a historical and not a modern or vintage piece, you have an advantage here since we don't really see bias cut pieces until the later part of the 19th century. Your pieces will align better with the grain, whereas more modern designs will not have that thriftiness set in. Then look at the pattern and see if you can piece anywhere. I say this mostly for vintage and modern sewists, since historical costumers generally use this as a mantra. We as modern sewists find having seams in random places to be like the worst thing ever, but becoming zen with piecing is the best thing you can do for your budget as a maker. Hello, my friends. Today's pattern is Laughing Moon number 103, which is the 1890s shirtwaist. Some of you may recall that we've already featured this pattern once on this channel when I made this 1890s shirtwaist with convertible sleeves. Today's is the exact same pattern with a couple of slight changes. The recommendation is 3 yards of fabric. I have 3 yards of fabric, but this one is going to be a particular challenge for us for 2 reasons. 1, we're using striped fabric, and 2, leg of mutton sleeves. Pretty sure this takes more than a yard of fabric on its own. It's not exact because I'm actually cutting out the D and E bodice instead of the A bodice, which has an over layer that's gathered. So I made some substitutions for the front lining piece, and I just used my pre-FBA original pattern piece for that. And then you'll just have to pretend that the back piece is much wider than it is. This is the pattern layout, part 1. Selvages are up here. This is the fold. There are a lot of open spaces here, a lot of open spaces. Total yardage, 53 inches. Part 2 is a little confusing. It says fabric opened flat. Here's the selvage, here's the selvage, but then it says fold? I don't think that's meant to be there because we don't cut 4 of these. The markers represent the flip side of the leg of mutton sleeve and the undersleeve. There's also, ooh, focus on me. There's also one more waist facing that goes this way. So, total used, the rest of the yardage. Let's see if we can do better than that. Like I said earlier, we want to start with things that need to be cut either on the fold or selvage, since those have limited placement. Then you can start playing around with the other pieces. Usually the next thing for me is anything that is cut on the bias. Don't be afraid to try flipping your pieces, as that tends to open up a lot of options. I like to fold on the grain line marker to make it easier to find on the back. Once the weird pieces are set, now you go and add in all your small straight pieces like cuffs, collars, and facings. These are the easiest to fit into wacko spots. Give yourself time and really look at the negative space of your fabric and see where those shapes could easily fit. This pin is where the bodice pieces ended in the original layout. How much fabric did we save? 10.5 inches. That's more than 1/4 of a yard. Giant sleeve time. Here we go with these darn bias pieces. Bias takes up so much space. We'll squeeze the 2 bias facings in this corner here. So what I've done here is scooched the sleeve up as close as I can between the other sleeve and the bias facing. Here's a better angle. I make a habit of butting up my pattern pieces as much as possible. Layouts usually give space between each piece, and that's plain old wasteful. Total fabric saved. Measuring from the narrowest part, 22 inches, my friends. That's more than half a yard, and that's the narrowest part. I've got more on the other end, plus some larger size scraps. Not a bad job, huh? You can make something out of that, like a cute vintage crop top. Another important thing to note is that your success at this will vary depending on a couple of different factors. The type of garment you're making will make a difference. Trousers don't have a lot of wiggle room, as they're generally two long pattern pieces with facings and waistbands, and there's not a lot of room to flip-flop and change position. Bias cut garments like slips or slinky dresses will also give you a very hard time. Your body shape can also help or hinder. If you have a short torso or you're just plain short, you'll have an easier time because your pieces are going to be smaller than the pattern. If you're longer in the torso or taller, it's going to be harder. Also, if you have certain pattern modifications that you always have to make, for example, you need to broaden the shoulders, you have a very full bust, you have a very narrow back, that's going to affect your yardage. Today's pattern is the Betty dress from Charm Patterns. This is a vintage inspired dress based off of this fabulous dress that Betty Draper wears in Mad Men, which for the record is one of my favorite shows of all time. If you haven't seen it, the costume design is so good. Now, originally I wasn't going to film this dress at all because this is my bridesmaid's dress for my friend's wedding, which is happening in a little over a month, and I'm on a very tight deadline because I have to squeeze this in between all of the makes that I'm working on for this channel. However, when I laid it out, it was such a perfect example of what I'm trying to show you that I knew I was going to have to squeeze in some filming anyway, because y'all, this is exactly what we're trying to do here. Originally, I was supposed to use some handkerchief linen from fabricstore.com, but the particular color that the bride approved has been out of stock for like 3 months. I ended up going to Joann's and finding something that matched like the day before all of the shit hit the fan. I'm so glad I did. However, because it was a backup that I didn't actually think I was going to use, even though the pattern calls for 6 7/8 yard of 45-inch fabric, I only bought 5. So we're gonna have to eke out this dress with almost 2 yards less than the pattern calls for. Let's see if I can do it. Here's the suggested layout on the screen. Since I don't have enough fabric to show you IRL, for my size range, it's saying 6 7/8 of 45-inch fabric. Note that you also need the yoke cut out of lining, but I'll be using my main fabric for this, so we have to add it to our layout. This is all cut on the cross grain with 4 huge skirt panels. This layout seems fairly comprehensive, but I think we can do better. Well, we have to do better. Joann's blew up and there's no way to get more fabric. After washing my fabric and getting the cross grain on grain, which of course we know with this cheap quilting cotton is never right, I have 179.5 inches to work with. The skirt, as is 41 inches each panel. To get the full skirt and the bodice front on grain on the fold without a center front seam, I need 185.5 inches. So I am 6 inches short. So I had to make a decision whether I wanted to cut the bodice front in half and have a center front seam, or if I wanted to make the skirt a little less wide. I've decided to make the skirt a little less wide. So I basically have to remove 1.5 inches from each panel. That's not that much. It's important to note that Charm provides different bodice front pieces for all cup sizes up to an H cup, so we don't have to faff about with an FBA, and therefore our bodice front piece is going to be much closer to the original layouts version than any of the other patterns we're doing today. Just gonna double check the skirt since my math isn't always right. Okay, we're good. Like before, we're going to start with the stuff on the fold and the selvage, the back bodice and the front skirt. This will be self-lined, like I said earlier, so we need to cut 2 of these babies. Nope. 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 Okay, so now we're getting creative. This front bodice piece is going to be the lining, and we will give it a center front seam to save on fabric. And in this case, cutting it on a single layer each time. Then the fashion fabric side will get cut open like the layout suggested right at the bottom after the skirts. It's awfully close. Now we'll eke out those last 2 skirt pieces. With the last little bit, we can play around with the yokes and pockets. I like to fold only on the exact width of the pieces like you see here, instead of folding the whole thing, which wastes more fabric. Also, the pocket is too small, so let's make that sack larger. The pockets are always the last thing I worry about, because while they do often take a bit of fabric to cut out, they're mostly hidden. So you can always cut them out of a different scrap fabric and face the opening with a strip of matching fabric like you see here. I do that a lot. In this case though, we just made it. This is all the fabric I have left. It was close, but we saved 1 7/8 yard of fabric. Now it's time to tackle the big four. I personally haven't used a modern big four pattern in a long time. They're not particularly good, but if you're a modern sewist, you probably use these a lot, so I wanted to give you an example. So I specifically pissed this pattern. Yeah, I specifically picked this pattern to do my recent 1790s gown, and it was a disaster. The pattern is wackadoodle. The skirts are illogically huge and don't match the widths in the American Duchess guide, even though it's their pattern. And yesterday when I was editing it, I was like, this is not gonna help anyone. So I dug into the pit of despair for my old modern big four patterns and pulled one out, and we're gonna see what we can do with it. This one. Here's the suggested pattern layout for my particular size with 60-inch fabric. Do you see how much white space there is? We can play with that. It does say with nap, so this is clearly meant for a one-way design. When you see this and they don't give you one without nap, you know you're gonna have a lot of wiggle room. So let's see what we can do. For my size in the shorter dress, which is what I think I did, it's saying 3 yards. We've got 4 pieces, 4 pattern pieces. It is cut all the way long, but it doesn't have a strap, so it's a fairly simple design. Unfortunately, most of what I have are lightweight sundresses. Before I lived in Texas, I lived in Florida, so obviously there weren't a lot of complicated coats and trousers happening when you live in that kind of climate. I have a 3-yard cut of fabric right here, ready to go. This is some nice wool I got from Burnley and Trowbridge that's destined to be an Edwardian trumpet skirt. Lightweight wool. Whoop! BRB. We're gonna pretend this isn't plaid because matching plaids is a whole nother monster, and that's not something I want to go into today. Pretend this doesn't have a pattern. I've got this lined up selvage to selvage. If I remember, number 1 needs to be cut on the fold. I have developed a handy trick to keeping the ruler where I need to when I'm trying to adjust the grain line far out on my table. You ready? It works. If you're enjoying this video or finding it helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up and saying hello in the comments. It's a small thing, but it goes a long way into helping this video get out to other folks. And given the current state of our economy, we could all do with saving a couple of extra bucks on fabric right now. Also, thank you to all of my supporters over on Ko-fi for continuing to help support this channel. Even if we're being as economical as possible with our fabric still costs money, and I could not do this without you. So thank you. All right, here is my first suggested layout. Here is the number 2 piece. She's on her own, but then I managed to get the rest of these put together quite comprehensively towards the top of the yardage. Total yardage used, precisely 2 yards. But let's try the crazy, I'm a historical costumer and I'm gonna get this out of the least amount of yardage possible or it'll kill me version. If I decide to piece one corner here, make one little wheel piece, folding this in a little bit, I can pull this up pretty close to where the rest of these pieces are at the very top of the yardage. Gotta make sure that we leave a seam allowance here, and when you cut this piece you have to add a seam allowance to that. Unfortunately, there's not really a way that I can get piece number 2 in with this width to get this out of any less fabric. It's just a length issue, unfortunately, but we can do something a little sneaky. Okay, so this time we're gonna take this and we're actually gonna put it on the selvage, because what that does is it opens up more yardage on that side. And that leaves us with a lot of extra space in this 2 yards. This is enough to cut out like a waistcoat, 22.5 inches. So folded, that's 45 inches basically. Our black Snail offering is our 1890s ladies waistcoat. You may remember this purple one that I made a while back. Let's cut it out. Okay, so this is view B, which is a little bit different than view A. View A for the lining has another piece, a collar piece that would go on this lining fabric as well. This takes up pretty much the whole yard of fabric. You have to cut 4 of these out. So here and here. We'll pretend that I didn't already cut into this to make a belt. So this is how the instructions laid out the lining. You can see that I've already added the FBA stuff to the front of this waistcoat, but we're going to, for the sake of argument, pretend that isn't there because the pattern maker didn't have an FBA to deal with when she was making this. Here is the layout of the fashion fabric. This utilizes the entire yard of fabric and doesn't actually fit with my modifications that I need to make for my bust size. So if I were to very carefully move this and then move this, can't quite get the corner here. There's about, I don't know, 1.5 inches extra. Let's start with the lining since that's going to be a bit easier. Once more starting with the bigger pieces and then tackling yet more stupid bias strips. You have to be extra careful with black Snail because anything that's a pure rectangle isn't usually included as a separate pattern piece and is only listed in the front with the actual numbered pieces. This does save time piecing pattern pages together, but can bite you in the butt halfway through your make if you didn't read the pattern pieces thoroughly. You've been warned. Here you can see me futzing about with the fashion fabric. I have 2 yards of this, but I'm hoping to reserve as much as I can to make something else, probably a Regency Spencer. These are some weirdly shaped pieces, and this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. This can take some time, so ultimately it might be a balance for you between what's more costly, the fabric or your time. This is silk, so definitely that's the costlier of the 2 in this case. But these pieces are cock blocking me hard. So as you can see, there is really no physical way, because I have all of this extra space here put in for my bust, to cut this out of a single yard of fabric. Usually I can get this right, but I just have to add so much space into this. This is a huge pattern. I don't know if you can tell, but this has the collar. This is the collar attached to the actual vest. So this is a particularly wasteful pattern. Normally the collar piece would be separate from the actual center front of the waistcoat, but whatever, it is what it is. So I'm either gonna have to piece or I'm gonna have to use more of the fabric, which thankfully I have more than a yard. Okay, I changed the direction of the grain for the front and the facing. I actually prefer to do it on the cross grain because the slums of this dupioni are going up and down, and I would like them to go up and down on my vest. I think it'll be a little bit more flattering. However, I'm gonna have to piece it. I think I'm okay with it. I'm gonna piece on the collar. This is the center back here. So here's the shoulder, so it's gonna be pieced in the back of my neck where nobody's really gonna notice. And if I do it in the same spot of the facing and the regular vest, I think it'll look fine. And that leaves me with this much extra space continuous to the rest of the yardage, which means I'll be able to get more out of it later. However, for science, here's how I would arrange it if I didn't have to deal with the FBA. Okay, I think that's how I would cut it out if I was not doing the FBA. That leaves this whole width of fabric here, which when you unfold it is quite a large piece. That's like a 6-inch strip. That could be used for a lot of things. We still got a couple of inches, 4 inches from the lowest point. So it does save quite a bit of fabric, and especially there's not a lot of awkward holes in between like there were before I rearranged it. That's about it for me. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out this one where I make an Edwardian fantail skirt using literally half the amount of yardage that they call for on the pattern. Thanks for watching. I love y'all, and I'll catch you in my next video.